Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Clone Force 97 podcast. I'm your host, Brandon, and today I will be joined by Charles and Anthony Ray Bench as we break down the explosive Skeleton Crew Season 1 finale, Episode 8, The Real Good Guys. This episode is packed with twists, turns, and everything we've been waiting for, so buckle up. But before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe to us on YouTube for all of our latest episodes and content. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast, be sure to rate and follow the show, as this is the best way to help us grow and to keep the Star Wars conversation going. And don't miss what's next. Our upcoming release schedule is live on our socials at Clone Force 97 Pod, and we're kicking off an Andor Season 1 rewatch starting January 24th. This is the perfect way to gear up for the Season 2 premiere on April 22nd, streaming exclusively on Disney+, so make sure that you're along for the ride. So, Anthony, we're going to start with you. I guess you weren't here last week because you're super cool and went snowboarding. And so do you want to give us your breakdown / review of Episode 7 before we get into Episode 8?
Sure. Episode 7, it was fine. It was cool. I would say Star Wars TV has kind of had a pretty good run of the penultimate episodes really kind of ramping things up and delivering something cool. And I would say that this one really kind of didn't. It was just kind of definitely a direct lead up to the finale, and jumping a little ahead, but I have some issues with the finale. I did like that I completely predicted Jod being a inhuman piece of garbage, and that part was pretty accurate. I did like the ruthlessness that he showed when he just executed Brutus. I thought that was an interesting way to kind of deal with that character. It almost made you sympathetic to Brutus, which I thought was kind of a weird feeling, because this entire time he's just been kind of an antagonistic, just mean kind of brute,
A backstabbing mutineer.
Yeah, and it's kind of he's just there helpless, and the kids are trying to use him as leverage, and Jod's just I don't care, just blast. I did like Jod's kind of more dark turn, where he there wasn't a lot. I expected to be a little bit of kind of sympathy for the kids, and in this Episode 7, they completely just shut that off. He's a jerk, he's evil, and I thought that was kind of neat. Gosh, the parents are dumb. in Episode 7 and Episode 8. I would say probably the last two episodes of Skeleton Crew have been my least favorite. I just think that there was more that they could have delivered. There was more setup that they could have done for a Season 2, and I wonder if they got a little bit gun shy about kind of teasing a Season 2 after The Acolyte. I wonder if there was kind of something else that they shot, and that they were oh, we might not get another shot, so let's just take it out and make it kind of a comprehensive one-off story, because that's how it felt to me. I don't know, maybe there was a in-credit stinger, or something that kind of hinted at what's to come in Season 2, but I didn't see any of that in what we got. All in all, a little disappointed. I still think it's a fun show. I still definitely recommend it. And, a lot of my favorite TV shows kind of taper off towards the end and really fail to satisfy. But this was a fun ride. And, 7 did its job. It set up the season finale, and that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree with you on points that you made. The one that I found that I was talking to Charles about last week that I didn't like was the brutal execution of Brutus, because though he's the backstabbing mutineer, he didn't really offer anything to the show. He was just kind of there as the figurehead, hey, Jod failed us, I'm just going to take over. But he didn't really do anything else. And you could kind of tell the entire time that he didn't really have the crew's full attention, which is why, like, when Jod did what he did, nobody stood up for Brutus. They were just
Yeah.
like, okay, like, you shot him in the face, that's fine. And I saw, like, a lot of people in the Star Wars community have this take that, like, everybody was expecting a Jod redemption, but what they did was they just showed, like, how Jod is just a scoundrel. Like, he is a pirate, and that's what he does. So he was using his skills that he knows from making his way through the galaxy as a pirate, which we got, like, a little bit of his background in the finale, which, like, we were right about. And then I was talking about it last week. Like, I don't think he made it to the temple. He was never trained. Like, when he was found, Order 66 had already happened. So, like, his master that he had, I think, was gunned down in the streets. Like, they took her and executed her, which apparently I've seen on, like, Threads and X and Blue Sky. Apparently there is a scene filmed and ready to go with, like, that background knowledge. Like, so they actually filmed it, but they decided not to include it. And I think they're maybe waiting to include it in a season 2, but, like, he already gave his backstory, so maybe it'll be something they just show when they do, like, that one Disney Plus series of, like, the making of Skeleton Crew. But, like I was saying, instead of being, like, this guy who you see him, like, have sympathy for the kids, you realize that all that sympathy was an act, and he is just a jerk, to keep it family friendly. Because there's a lot of other words I could use, but, like, he's just that. Like, he was playing them the entire time to get what he wants because he is just a pirate, which I thought was interesting to see. And then another thing was, we were talking a little bit before recording. Like I said, episode 7 didn't leave that much of an impression, but listening to you recap it, it definitely left more of an impression, because I remember telling Charles and Brent, who was our guest last week, I remember telling him that I didn't know how they would wrap up the show in one episode. For me, there was so many things that had to happen specifically to Jod for the kids to make their escape that I didn't see how it would work. But the one thing that did pay off, that I made a suggestion about, I was half right about it, because I thought Tak Renad was still the supervisor and left it in control of the robots, and that Ad-Atom became an autonomous society after he left to become a pirate. So I was wrong about the Tak Renad thing completely, and I realized that Tak Renad is just the guy that Jod pulled the blade out of, and you hear the soul sound leaving its body. That was probably Captain Tak Renad. But the one thing I was right about that is and all those other worlds, and probably why, like, we see Ad Akron not survive, is because they were autonomous societies who didn't know what to do when the robots weren't in control.
Yeah, definitely episode 7 was, like, a lot of setup. But that was the episode where it kind of confirmed for me that Anthony's prediction was coming to fruition, where I was like, oh, okay, we're not getting him back. Like, and I really wanted a Jod redemption really badly, but that's not what we got at all, as we saw in episode 8. But, I thought, like Anthony, that the way he killed Brutus was very true to a pirate. It was very seizing the moment, seizing the opportunity, and taking care of business. Him putting the helmet back on was us seeing that he was returning to the character we saw in the first episode, which was Captain Silvo. I feel like him wearing that helmet is very much a part of the personality of the Ruthless Pirate. I hope that there is a season 2, because I said I'm not a huge fan of flashback scenes, but I would like that flashback scene because I want to know who Jod was trained by. And I feel like until we see that scene, we won't get a name or a character who trains Jod in the Force. But also, after you learn that, his pessimism makes a lot more sense to me, because he's an orphan. From what we know, he's an orphan on the streets. He meets a Jedi, and they're like, hey, you can be something greater than what you are. And that excites him. And just for him to watch her get executed in the streets.
It would be interesting to kind of juxtapose Jod's kind of history and backstory with whims. Both of them just kind of long for adventure and long for something beyond their current living situation. But Jod finds this person who promises adventure and loses them. And I can't remember what episode, but there's that kind of twist on the Jedi rule of like attachments are forbidden, where he says, don't get attached. Like, it'll just kind of, lead you to a bad place. Like, just stay and take care of yourself. Don't worry about anybody else. I saw that as kind of like he was being trained as a Jedi, but like completely like misunderstood that lesson, much like Anakin did. But I mean, yeah, like the whole no redemption for Jod thing was very telegraphed. Like, he's basically Long John Silver from Treasure Island. Like, he is very
True.
altruistic, but he does have that connection. Like in the book, like Long John Silver also kind of is like a father figure to the character of Jem. But every chance that he gets where he advances, he takes it and like disregards Jem and disregards the other people. Like in the book, like he is selfish. And I think they did a good job in episode 7 and 8 of kind of showing that like he's not evil. He's just self-serving to a degree where he will commit evil if it means that he'll get what he wants and get away with it. I think that if they do a season 2, which I want them to, like, I had fun with the show. Like, even, like I said, even if it did kind of taper off towards the end, like I enjoyed it, and I would love to see the characters continue on and, again, like not mix with the greater Star Wars universe or like show up in The Mandalorian, which I figure they will, especially after how this ended. But like, I would love to see them just kind of, continue on the story. But I feel like they're going to tease a redemption with Jod, and ultimately Jod is just going to kind of do the same thing that Long John Silver did in the book. And like, he is last seen like with his treasure, and that's the end. I don't see any wisdom in like making him, I guess, change to a degree where he is redeemed. Maybe change to a degree where like he softens with his cruelty. Maybe there's a whole situation where, like he has the chance to, kill the kids or capture the kids, and he's just like, what, just let him go. It's fine. But I don't see any wisdom in kind of redeeming that character, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said a few episodes back is exactly what they're going to do, where you kind of speculated that or suggested that maybe Jod is the primary antagonist of a season 2, which is what same thing is where I'm hoping they go with it, because there wasn't anything implicit for a second season as far as like, oh, big reveal at the very end of the episode. But for me, the way Wim looks up at the starfighter at the very end of episode 8 was extremely reminiscent to the way that the kid looks into the stars at the end of The Last Jedi, where he's staring up at the galaxy, and now there's this whole
Broom
new
kid.
Yeah, Broom Kid. Force sensitive Broom Kid, who I'm like, I'll read a comic about that kid. Like, why is that kid not getting trained, dude? I need to know more about him. But, I thought those two were two very similar shots, and but what I liked about episode 8 was Wim's dad stealing the speeder from the D-bag. Once again, family friendly. But, that was probably one of my favorite moments from there. And then you start seeing him while they're getting chased and getting shot at. He starts having fun. Like, after they make it across the canyon, he like flips around on the speeder, and he's like, woo, 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 woo. I'm like, dude, that's actually hilarious. And then another part that I really liked was when Wim's like, Dad, can you do this? And he's like, son, I'm a level 7 whatever. He's like, I can do it. Like, all right, you nerd. But it's like those kinds of moments are why I like this show so much, because there's very tense portions, but they break the tension extremely well, where it like certain parts just are very intense, and then you have just that small, not anything where it takes you out of the scenario, but these small comedic breaks that kind of break the tension a little bit. So those were cool. KB flying the ship by herself and then putting him back together, but SM-33 holding she's like in the ship and he's like, hold my head a little higher so he can see. And then he comes out of the ship after they just they find her. He comes walking out of the ship holding his head in his hand. I was like, that's actually hilarious. I love that.
Yeah, I was glad that he was fine after getting his head chopped off, and I think I was the one who thought he was actually gone after last episode, but you made a point, Charles, and everybody else has made a point that a lot of droids have lost their heads in Star Wars and have been totally fine. So even as long as they could have put a new head on him, he still would have been SM-33. So yeah, I was glad to see him make a reappearance and be like, oh, how are you flying the ship? And you just see SM-33 reappear. But to what you were saying about Wim looking up at the Corvette at the end of the episode, that has two different sort of like symbolisms for me. The one is like the Corvette is one of the two ships you see in the beginning of A New Hope. And it's like when he's looking up and he's in awe because he's seeing this New Republic ship who are the real good guys, like it might be giving him a new hope that like he didn't want his adventure to end. We saw in episode 7, he was very depressed about it. And he was very like, if I knew that it was ending, I wish I would have never started it. And seeing that Corvette appear kind of like opened his eyes to be like, hey, like I'd assume that if there is a season 2, one At-Atin, I think, joins the New Republic entirely, but he goes off to maybe like an academy or like some kind of school off of At-Atin to kind of continue his adventure and to see more of the Republic, which reminds me of a character from the Aftermath trilogy. I don't know if either of you have read it, but his name's Temmin Wexley. He goes by Snap. He makes a appearance in the sequel trilogies. He's originally part of Black Squadron, but he dies on Exegol as part of Blue Squadron. And he's the one I thought he kind of looked like John Favreau a little bit. He was like the one guy that they focused on. You don't know why they're focusing on him. Like
Yeah,
that.
the actor,
So that's,
I can't remember his name, but he's friends with J.J. Abrams, and he was in Lost, and he was in Heroes. Yeah, his character is a nephew of Wedge, if I remember correctly. Right?
So his character is actually the stepson of Wedge Antilles. So,
okay, yeah.
So his mom is Nora Wexley, who, like, the whole Aftermath trilogy is about...
It's Greg Grunberg. That's who it is.
Yeah.
So the story is mostly about Nora Wexley and, like, and what she does afterwards, but it includes Wedge because Nora goes off to join the New Republic. I mean, what becomes the New Republic. She fights in the rebellion, and she's fighting alongside, like, Wedge and them. But afterwards, she just kind of stays, and she left her son in the care of her sister. But he becomes, like, this rebellious guy, and he creates this droid called Mr. Bones, who's just a B-1 battle droid, but he is a murderous B-1 battle droid. Like he... doesn't know how to fix his voice box correctly, so he speaks very weird, and like he just loves violence and killing. But where I'm going with that is like because Nora's gone for so long, Temmin like just missed his mom and kind of like wanted more. Like he was like, I can take care of myself. Like I can be a pilot. I can join the rebellion. I can be part of the New Republic. And ultimately, Wim's character resembles Temmin, who like wants to be taken seriously, who craves adventure, who doesn't need his parents to like do anything for him. He's like, hey, look at all this stuff I've done on my own. There's so much more out there. And like when he saw that Corvette, it just reminded me so much of Temmin.
Yeah, I mean, I thought bringing in the light Corvette again was super cool because it does give you that feeling of like, yeah, it's the New Republic, but it's reminiscent of the rebellion in that first scene in the original Star Wars. And I thought that was so cool. And also, another thing I wanted to say was we got Star Wars microwave before GTA 6. We saw what a microwave looks like in Star Wars, and I thought that was cool because I was like,
yeah, with Wendell's little little dad joke too, like, oh, a home cooked meal, and he just like heated this thing up.
Yeah, you know, I'm like, I love when they do more stuff for you to see how people actually live in the Star Wars universe, you know, and like how they cook, how like clothes that they wear. I love anything that adds to the universe. But that's all I wanted to say. That was on my mind. I forgot about that.
I have a completely different take on the Corvette thing. So I think that the Star Wars television shows that have been after Return of the Jedi, but before the sequel trilogy, have been really harping on the idea that the New Republic is not well put together and is very fragile and is kind of bolted down by bureaucracy. And I think that that was kind of a hint towards season 2's conflict, which will be kind of at Atten, like getting reassembled into like the greater universe, like, you know, and becoming a part of it, but also kind of like being so old school in their mindset of like, you know, kind of living that old Republic kind of mentality where they're just going to be like, you guys aren't good. You guys are corrupt. Like, and they don't have any experience with the Empire. So they don't know what true corruption and true kind of oppression is, but they're going to feel like they're exploited by the New Republic. They're going to feel like you're just as bad as Jod, just wanting to control us and wanting to kind of take our resources. And like, there's going to be kind of probably a subplot where the First Order kind of swings in, and maybe that's where the First Order got their kind of wealth in order to have Snoke kind of establish that fleet that we saw in the sequel trilogy. But I think that
or
is
they could use the credits to establish like that Shadow Council that we saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I don't think that it was like a hopeful thing. I think it was just like, all right, like our world is about to change and we might not be ready for that change. And that change might be a little counterintuitive to the way that we've lived our entire existence for however long it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you got to imagine like you grow up on a world your whole life. And we have it confirmed now that the adults know that Atten is sectioned off. Yeah, you know, they're not ignorant to that fact.
Yeah,
but also,
you learn that after graduation, apparently. It's like almost like an initiation type thing.
Yeah, where they're like, oh, by the way, nobody can ever leave, and here's why. But you also, what was I going to say? I just can't imagine like growing up on a world my whole life, regardless if I knew or not that there was a whole galaxy out there. And then the New Republic comes in and is, by the way, you miss an entire galactic civil war. You miss like the Star Wars, essentially, you know? And
the titular Star
Wars. Yeah, literally. You miss the Star Wars. And so I'm interested in seeing a season 2 where those communities on Atten have to reconcile with that fact that like, oh, there's been some really bad stuff going on and we've completely missed it, you know, because like the pirates attacking them is the first violence on Atten in God knows how long, which also has to be a huge shock to them. Everything's shutting down, the droids getting shut down, and then having galactic pirates. Who knows how many they actually killed in that episode? We don't see any real on-screen deaths, but we see a lot of explosions that I'm like, okay, if nobody died, that's some BS, because they were terrorizing that planet. So I'm really intrigued to see how they cope with that fact. And then I do like where you're going with it, Anthony, where it's like, yeah, but the only thing I have to say against that is that they've been under the control of these robots where there's very limited things that they can do. They can't even, like you saw when the kids are exploring the woods,
right?
The droids are right behind them being like, hey, you can't be here. Hey, you can't be here. Hey, you can't be here. So I feel like they're already used to dealing with a sort of oppression.
I was going to say, you bring up an interesting kind of story, you know, kind of possibility where, you know, again, like I want to say like a big thread that they just kind of shove in our faces with the new, you know, post Return of the Jedi, pre-sequel trilogy is the disorganization and the chaos and the corruption of the New Republic. Like, we could experience that. Like, Atten could experience that on some kind of scale and be like, well, you know, like you told us about this like empire. The empire kind of sounds organized and a lot more, you know, kind of in line with what we went through, where, you know, there's structure and there's kind of a chain of command, and kind of that could be the conflict right there. And it could, you know, kind of almost like create a split, like a division in Atten, where, you know, they hear that there's like kind of a resurrection of this empire. And, you know, some people are like, let's go with that. Like, that sounds more in line with what we're used to, rather than, you know, kind of putting our trust and faith in a republic that obviously is nothing like the republic of old. You know, that could be the entire like schism. That's a possibility. But I think that, you know, I think that that's going to be a huge conflict of like, you know, how does Atten kind of reintegrate themselves into the greater universe? And I think there's a lot of story potential in that, but honestly, I hope they don't go that way, because even though it makes sense and, you know, it is kind of a logical thread, I just want the next season to be planet hopping. I want them to explore. I think that this show was the best when they were kind of going from planet to planet trying to find their way home. And I know that it's going to be different circumstances, but I want that. I don't want a lot of time spent on Atten, and I don't want boring, like, yes, we get it, the New Republic is awful, the New Republic is going to fail, the New Republic is going to completely drop the ball, we get it, it's in everything. But I don't know. I just want season 2.
Yeah, I will say something you brought up that does make sense to me, and it makes sense to other people too, because a lot of people proposed it very early on in the season, but it was that the mints on Atten might be what fund the First Order to power, you know, and gives Snoke his wealth and leverage to create a new empire, essentially. And so I think that would be the best way that they could kind of tie this into the sequel trilogy, is that, like what you said, there is discourse and dissent among the citizens of Atten, because they are a very regimented, organized society. And then being brought into something like the New Republic, which were like anywhere between 5 to 10 years after Return of the Jedi, things are not going very well for the New Republic. Everything is extremely disorganized. So I could definitely see them being dissatisfied.
To be PG, it's a poop show.
Yeah.
It's just a giant...
Dude, we gotta find a place we can be unhinged. But but yeah, I could definitely see that being a thing, you know, because there is gonna be something that ties all of these shows into the sequel trilogy, whether we like it or not. That's how I see it going, just because they want to connect all of these storylines, which to me is cool. I'm okay with that. I just hope that it is in a really bad butt way. Once again, PG. But I want to see that happen in a way that is very cohesive and it's not forced, if that makes sense.
I think that if they're going to go that route and really kind of connect Atten to the First Order, it needs to be the solid B plotline, and the A plotline should always revolve around the kids and exploring and getting into trouble.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, like, it's fine to cut back and see what's going on in Atten, but like, if that's the focus of season 2, you lose that exploration, you lose that adventure aspect, you lose, you know, the crew dynamic, you lose a lot of that, and it just gets bogged down into like, we get it, the New Republic is awful and disorganized, we get it. So
I want to bring up one thing that did not make sense to me. I didn't care that it didn't make sense to me, but after Wim and Fern are able to wrestle the lightsaber back from Jod, and they shut down the barrier, or essentially destroy the barrier, you know, Wim turns the lightsaber on, and Jod's like, all right, that's it, I'm done for. And I'm like, dude, force grab that. He's a little kid. Force grab it from him, dude. Like, just grab it back. I didn't see how Jod was technically beaten in that moment. I'm fine with it. It just didn't and maybe I need to watch it again, and I probably will. But that part didn't make sense to me, where he's just like, "Okay, you got me." It's like the villain in a
Well,
Scooby-Doo movie.
it's not really the lightsaber. It's the fact that the barrier was already taken down, which means the New Republic can get in.
True.
KB and them have already said that, like, we've called the New Republic. He's just weighing his options because I think by that point KB had already crashed. And you could tell, like, I guess that was kind of where we see a little bit of redemption in him. Not, like, entirely, but he didn't want anybody to die. He just wanted what he wanted and was hoping that nobody would put up a fight. So, like, he's willing to kill the supervisor because it's a droid, and to him, droids don't have meaning to him. And, like, he was also probably young enough to see B-1 battle droids and doesn't care for, like, a lot of people in this era don't care for droids in general. So,
Yeah.
So it wasn't really as much as, like, he could pull the lightsaber. It's like, what are
was
you
he gonna
going to do
after?
Yeah, because he, like, unless he wanted to go on a slaughtering spree and go full Anakin Order 66, it doesn't, there was nothing, there was nothing else for him to do.
Not just the men, but the women and the children.
Slaughter them like animals. But also, we've seen that he struggles with using the Force. Like, his first act in the show was, him very slowly and, not elegantly grabbing the key. And I know that, like, in the end of, I think, what was it, episode 6, or when he first gets the lightsaber, he does kind of use the Force and call it. But I want to say, like, that was kind of like him being excited and, like, almost, kind of like feeling confident in himself. And, the Force does take confidence and it does take focus. And maybe he just doesn't have the ability to, kind of do that on command like a normal Jedi would. Maybe it's something that, like, he has to kind of tremendously, like, exert himself to use the Force.
Yeah. I think if he was stronger, like, if he had the training that we thought that a lot of people thought he had, like, being in the temple, 2 kids holding onto a lightsaber would have been nothing for him. Because then he probably could have pushed and pulled at the same time. Like, he could have been like, you know what, like, no, this isn't an issue. But the fact that 2 kids, I don't know, probably somewhere between 9 and 11, or anywhere between 9 and 13 were able to do that, like, just shows that he's not that strong. Now, he is clearly Force sensitive because this might be the first time we've seen it. Somebody actually deflects a stun blast, which was, like, really cool to, like, watch that stun blast kind of, like, fall like raindrops, kind of, which was, like...
Oh, I missed that entirely.
You didn't see him fight off the stun blast from the robots when they come back up?
No, I missed it. See, I'm going to have to watch the episode again.
Yeah, so he does that, which was contradictory to something I thought last week, because I was like, he's never trained. Like, he looked clumsy with the lightsaber when he took control of the ship. But boy, did he look posed deflecting those blasts. And I don't know if that's just pure intuition and not wanting, like, kind of the adrenaline that really helped him get through that moment. But I thought that was very interesting to see.
Yeah, I think his Force usage is either, like, very, like, instinctual, like, when he pushed Wim's dad, like, it was almost kind of a place of, like, emotion, or
like a reflex.
Like a reflex, or he just has to struggle in order to use it. I think it's kind of like one or the other. Like, he doesn't have balance. It's either, like, I need focus, I need energy, I need exertion, and then I can do this menial task of, like, carrying, like, floating a key to me. Or it's like I'm in the height of battle, or, like, my emotions are high, or, like, I'm in danger, and then it just becomes like a reflex. I think that's kind of how the Force works with him.
Yeah, I think another thing that we saw in this episode, one's an Easter egg, and one I think is a callback to Mando season 3. One, we got to see the B-Wings use their lasers in live action. We've seen it in Rebels, but this is the first time we got to see them come in and take out that ship, which is where the callback comes in to Mando season 3. Like, Jod watching that ship fall into the planet and just kind of like explode or whatever it did. Like that whole sequence, how it was slow, like its slow descent into the planet, remind me a lot of Gory and Shard's ship. Like when they watched that fall on Navarro, like it kind of had this slow descent where you'd watch it fall, and then next thing you know, like it finally hit, and that was like I think they used the same exact animation to show the old like I don't know if we talked about it. That ship that the pirates are using is an old like medical outpost from the Clone Wars. So we get to watch that outpost fall into the planet, and it just had a lot of resemblance to Gory and Shard's ship from Mando season 3.
Well, did anybody? So there's another thing I noticed. Did anybody else notice the callback to Palpatine with the supervisor when he talks about Fern and he's like, oh, I've been watching, I know your mom, I know you. I've been watching you with great interest.
Yeah,
I'm like, that's pretty on the nose. You know what I mean? I was like, what is that, dude?
He sounded a little like Palpatine, like Sheev, and in that, like he didn't sound like a Sidious there. He clearly sounded like Phantom Menace Sheev Palpatine. Like, oh,
jovial.
we're gonna be watching you with great interest.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah, but I thought
that
that
last
was
transmission. Yeah, it's interesting that the last transmission they got was like the Jedi being established as like public enemy number one. So I mean, like that kind of has a little bit of allusions to the fact that even though they were kind of out of reach and like separated from things, maybe they weren't. But I just did want to say, like, B-Wings are my favorite fighters. Like, I loved, like, using the B-Wings in, like, the X-Wing versus TIE Fighter games. I loved that episode of Rebels, even though they destroyed the old school canon of, like, Admiral Akbar being the one who created the B-Wings, which I always loved. But, yeah, like, during the sequel trilogy, I was like, why are they not using B-Wings? Where are the B-Wings? I think B-Wings showed up in Rise of Skywalker, right?
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
But briefly, it's in the final fight on Exegol.
Yeah. More B-Wings, please. They're so cool. Like they're awesome. Like I love the design.
I'll text Dave for you right now. I got you, dude.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah. To elaborate more on like what Anthony was saying, like the last communication AT-AT had was a generation ago. Like it was 30 years ago, and it was from the Republic, which means like they haven't had any communication since the Empire's taken over, which like definitely still leads me to believe that this was something that Palpatine never knew about, because he would have used it had he known. And even though he becomes Chancellor at the end of Episode 1, after the vote of no confidence on Chancellor Valorum, it shows that this was something never trusted to him. It was never for him to know about. So the last communication he got, just because it was put out on all channels, and we hear the supervisor say it, that Jedis are traitors. And then the supervisor goes, so which one are you lying about? Being an emissary or being a Jedi?
Yeah,
I love that line.
Bars, dude.
And then
I was like, damn, my boy's up and up on it.
I noticed, like, after rewatching that episode for a second time, when Jod stabs the supervisor in the eye, one, the glass melts to kind of look like a teardrop. But the second thing that happened was when all, like, the arms and stuff come out and he's being stabbed, like, you can kind of hear it, but he's kind of telling them to protect the mint. Like, as the supervisor is dying. But I think we've done a pretty good job of kind of breaking down this episode and giving our thoughts. I guess the last thing I want to discuss before we end the episode is, like, what do you think they could have done better? I made it known instantly on social media that the last couple minutes, even though I liked the scene with Wim looking at the Corvette, it just didn't do it for me. Like, you have this whole episode with all this action and KB's flying into space to contact the New Republic, the Fern and Wim are taking down the barrier. Like Wendell's making all of his funny little jokes, and the parents are being as small-minded as they've been the entire show. But the New Republic comes in and saves the day, and like we don't get to see them land. Like we just see them looking at it. You don't see Kim again. You don't see anybody else. And the story just kind of ends. I had a grievance with that. And then my only other grievance was the only time we saw anything dealing with Hondo Onaka was episode 2 with his ship. But honestly, though I'm personally a little upset about it, this show did a great job of not needing a cameo. I think if your show needs a cameo, you're not doing a good job of establishing a show on its own. And
Hey,
the
we
fact
got
that
Vane. Vane was a cameo.
but he was kind of just a non-character because
Hey.
all those pirates worked for Gory and Shard before.
Hey,
Like John
hey,
was,
I'm a Vane stan, all right?
yeah, you didn't even know who he was.
I didn't. You're right. You're completely right. Didn't remember him until I rewatched Mando season 3.
Yeah,
Anthony, you go
like,
first. What do you think?
Sure. I will say this. The mystery over the supervisor was anticlimactic, making it a droid. Like, I hated that. I would have liked to have something better, something more, I guess, interesting than just like the entire place is ran by droids. And I mean, yeah, they set it up with, the security droids and everything like that, but I just thought there was a better resolution to that because the show did kind of establish that as like the main mystery. And I'm glad that there weren't as many mysteries as like in The Acolyte, but this was just kind of disappointing to me. I would have loved for it to be something else. I will say that it did feel a little anticlimactic, with the Republic basically like coming in and saving the day. I would have loved to see a little bit more like where they land, where they'd be like, like we didn't even know this place existed. Like what's going on? Like, we needed debriefing to kind of set up like a season 2. I thought that would have been a little bit better. I wish, that outside of Jod, we did have more of like a villain, because the entire point of the show is to kind of show like Jod is just not evil, but selfish. We needed somebody who was evil. We needed someone who, did kind of like pose a serious threat as far as, kind of like standing in the way of the kids getting home and whatnot. I think that it was a solid show and I enjoyed it. I think it started for me the first 2 episodes. It was like, all right, this is just going to be the best thing ever. And now it's like, it was a 8 out of 10, like a solid 8 out of 10. Nothing that like, ruined it. Nothing that, destroyed the experience for me, but certainly a little bit of loose ends that were just not resolved in a satisfying way. I think the characters are the strength for the show. The characters need to stay together. The characters need to grow. Whatever adventures you put them on, like, don't break them up. I have a bad feeling that they're going to separate the kids in season 2, and I don't want that to happen. I really want them to stay together as a crew. Overall, like, I think it's an amazing show, a little bit of weak ending, but I just had fun with it. Like, I can't even be mad at the things that I didn't like. Like, it's just like, their choices. It's not anything that like completely ruined anything for me. It's just, it would have been better if they went in this direction. Like, it's not like a Game of Thrones situation where it's like, oh, you literally just destroyed the show and I can't go back and watch it knowing where it ends. It's just,
we don't speak about season 8 of Game of Thrones. We don't talk about that here.
No, we don't.
How do you feel about it, Charles? I didn't give my personal rating. I give it like about a 9 out of 10. I think the relationships and how the kids came together were really good and meaningful. But what do you think, Charles?
I mean, as far as the rating goes, I'm the softest one out of the 3 of us, so I'm definitely going at least a 9.5. If not a 10 out of 10, and strictly because this was the most fun I've had watching Star Wars like week to week in a long time. Like I've told you guys, I was a fan. I am a fan of the Acolyte, and I do hope something changes where we get a season 2, just because I want more Kamir. I want to see what happens with him training. Is it May? May's the one. Yeah. But
He trains OSHA.
he trains. I knew that. I was just testing you. I'm actually
I
gonna go
didn't
back
remember.
yeah, I'm gonna go back and rewatch it actually because I want to get my own second opinion on it. But it was, to me, like I said, it was just super fun from the jump. There's nothing, if there was anything that I guess I wish would be different, is just I'd wish, because I said it last week and Anthony, you were here, but I've just been begging, and actually I've said it on an episode with you, Anthony, where I'm just like, dude, I just wish the episodes were longer. That's it. I just want more time to get more context. And I will say that they did give me 10 extra minutes on this finale episode. Not enough minutes for my taste, because I do wish we could have gotten what happens when the New Republic lands on At-Aten. And what do they do about that? And what is the conversations that they'd have? But I think what this show did really great is give us a whole group of new characters that the entire fandom can cherish and love. And not just the kids. They gave us a brilliant new droid who is going to go right up there with Chopper and R2-D2 and C-3PO, as I think SM-33 is going to become one of those beloved droids that people talk about for years on end. They gave us a very complex antagonist. I don't want to call Jod a villain. He is an antagonist in the later half of the show. And like you said, Anthony, and like you said, Brandon, it was, I still do believe he has a soft spot for these kids, which is why he doesn't kill them or hit them with the same brutality that like we saw him kill Brutus with. He does have a soft heart for those children because they probably remind him of himself as a child. But I thought it was very well done. I think Jude Law did an amazing job. All of the kids are amazing actors, which kids in Star Wars for some people can be a hit or miss. Like they can do a good job, or if they don't do a good enough job, people are going to let them have it. I am sad Skeleton Crew had lower viewership than The Acolyte when, like I said, I'm a big fan of The Acolyte, but I do believe Skeleton Crew was a much better show, and so I'm hoping that people will go back and watch it, and formulate some opinions on it, because like I said, it was just fun. It was very Goonies, it was very E.T., but Star Wars, and it was one of those things that, like, I was telling Brandon, me and Brandon were texting, and I was like, oh, I'm going to rewatch this show. I'm going to get my 6-year-old nephew, because I have the go ahead from his parents to watch this with him. So I'm going to go back and watch it again with him and see how he likes it and have a good old time with it. And it's one of those things where I feel like if you're a Star Wars fan, young or old, there's going to be something in there for you, and it was just fun. So 9.5, 10 out of 10, but I don't want people to call me a shill.
Yeah. The only thing I have to say on that in general about viewership hours being the lowest is that this all only matters compared to the budget. So, like, if it is lower than The Acolyte, this had a quarter of the budget. It was a $100 million budget compared to a $400 million budget. So, as long as the dollars make sense to Disney, we'll get a season 2. And that's all for this episode of Clone Force 97. Thanks for joining us as we broke down Skeleton Crew's epic finale, The Real Good Guys. We want to hear from you. What did you think of the twists, turns, and the jaw-dropping ending? Hit us up on socials at CloneForce97Pod and join the conversation. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast, be sure to rate and follow the show. Your support keeps us flying high and helps more Star Wars fans find us, and don't miss what's next. As I said earlier in the show, we're kicking off our Andor Season 1 rewatch starting January 24th. This will lead us right up to the premiere of Andor Season 2, which comes out April 22nd, streaming exclusively on Disney+. You don't want to miss this journey through the rise of the rebellion. Until next time, stay sharp, stay strong, and as always, may the Force be with you.